Palworld is a game that holds a very special place in my heart. One of the most renowned titles of 2024, Palworld was an instant hit upon release in January of last year, attracting the attention of millions of players basically overnight by combining elements of the survival sandbox genre with creature collector titles such as Pokemon in order to create a very unique experience that's pretty unlike anything else out there. Since its release though, times have definitely changed. Retaining a sizable player count even today, the game has only continued to expand, with massive content updates regularly introducing new locations, mechanics, and of course, new pals. But new gameplay elements haven't been the only additions, for as this game has grown, it also continues to build upon a cryptic underlying story that hides just beneath its surface. Indeed, from the very beginning, Palworld's narrative hasn't exactly been its primary appeal, but make no mistake, there is a surprisingly robust, intertwining story to be found within this game, even if it may not seem so at first glance. Back when the title's first major content update, known as the Sakurajima expansion, dropped in June, we got some of the first hints that new world building was yet to come for this game. The expansion's exclusive faction, the Moonflowers, had an intriguing backstory that helped add to the setting, but although their existence would prove interesting, the limited nature of Sakurajima's story didn't seem to leave folks with the impression that a lot of this game's story-related through-lines were going to be revisited anytime soon. But, as it turns out, we couldn't have been more wrong. Palworld's second, and at the time of recording, most recent expansion, Feybreak, boasts the most new content this game has ever seen, and it's not even close. Just like Sakurajima, it adds an entirely new island to the Palpagos archipelago, albeit one that's substantially larger in size than its counterpart. In more ways than sheer scale, though, it's clear that Feybreak definitely marks a turning point in Palworld's development, for this update also brings with it some of the most substantial new story information that this game has ever had. The new lore revealed to us on this mysterious new isle helps shed light on some of the deepest and most far-flung secrets of Palworld's past. So much so that after nearly a year of absence and a couple hundred feverish comments pleading with me to do just this, I think it's time that we finally return to the Palpagos Islands and take a look for ourselves at all of the new lore that's recently been introduced. Over the course of this video, we're going to be rehashing a lot of old mysteries from the history of this game. We have a lot to cover today, so I hope you'll join me as we discover the story of Palworld's most narratively significant update of all time. This is the full lore of Feybreak. But first, allow me to introduce you to what is by far my favorite way to take in the sounds of the Palpagos Islands, or anywhere else for that matter, the sponsor of today's video, Rayne. We've all heard of Rayne before, with their sleek, premium quality listening products that start at just half the cost of other premium audio brands. But I'm here to tell you that the latest model of their exceptional everyday earbuds is better than ever before at the same low cost, shipped with outstanding features like a whopping 32-hour battery life and active noise cancellation technology, which is tough to come by at an affordable cost. It's easy to see why Rayne is the preferred audio brand of millions. I jumped at the opportunity to get a hold of a pair of these new everyday earbuds for myself, and I've gotta say, they're a huge upgrade from anything I've used before. I'm pretty particular about my earbuds because I'll often use the same pair for everyday activities like listening to music, but also for editing videos like this one. Luckily though, Rayne is absolutely perfect in both a personal and professional setting. Their multi-point connectivity allows me to pair with my phone and PC simultaneously, optimized gel tips keep them snugly within the ear, and of course that 32-hour battery means I never have to stop what I'm doing to recharge. But even if I did, the sleek and high-quality protective case features a quick charge function, where just 10 minutes of charging equates to 90 minutes of listening. So needless to say, I'm in love with these things, and they're definitely going to become a permanent part of my editing and listening workflow. Plus, both the earbuds and the case come in a variety of fun colors to fit anyone's style, including my personal favorite option, sunset yellow and black. So if you're ready to upgrade your audio game at a fraction of the price of other premium brands, head over to my link in the description or pinned comment and go to buyraycon.com/Averberon to get up to 20% off site-wide. That's right, whether you're shopping for yourself or a loved one, that's up to 20% off everything on Raycon's site, including headphones, when you go to buyraycon.com/Averberon. Thanks again to Rayne for sponsoring today's video, and with that, let's get back into the lore. As mentioned in the introduction, this is by no means my first time diving into the lore of Palworld. Almost a year ago, I made a video documenting the full storyline of the game's initial version, and for many of the new revelations in Feybreak to make sense or hold any weight, it's pretty important that we take a second to understand some of the major principles that we first uncovered all the way back then. Even though it's obviously a little bit outdated, I think that video actually holds up pretty well, so I think it may be worthwhile to check out if you haven't done so, but even if you don't intend on doing that, let's try and quickly go over the basic story of Palworld anyway, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Since time immemorial, the Palpagos Islands have been a very unique area of the world. They're the only place on Earth where creatures called Pals are known to exist, and Pals themselves have some very distinctive biological traits that set them apart from other species. For starters, the life cycle of a Pal is wholly unique. We're told within various journal entries scattered throughout the game that, unlike other creatures, Pals simply come into being in seemingly miraculous ways. When a mother and father Pal love one another very much, it's said that an egg simply appears in their vicinity, no greater means of reproduction required. And likewise, when a Pal's life is at its end, their body leaves the world in much the same way, simply disappearing as if it had never existed in the first place. From this description alone, it's obvious that Pals are definitely a special variety of creature, but where they reside is equally puzzling. Most of what we know about the Palpagos Islands in the modern day comes, again, from journal entries left behind by a character only known as the Castaway, whose writings provide light guidance to new players while also providing a basic template for the lore and mysteries that permeate the game. The Castaway first arrived on Palpagos when, in the course of examining world maps, they noticed a peculiarity regarding one particular portion of ocean. According to them, it appeared empty, so after packing their things, they set off alone in order to investigate this uncharted portion of the sea. Obviously, this region of ocean is indeed where Palpagos is located, but after setting out, it wouldn't be long before the Castaway would discover the reason why these islands were undocumented in the first place. In their own words, "Strangely enough, the island is shrouded in a thick fog that makes discerning it from the sea impossible. Attempting to steer away from the fog, I turned rudder, only to be enveloped by an even deeper fog. Just then, someone attacked me. I have no idea where the attack came from, but my boat was all but destroyed. With nothing but wreckage left, I was still somehow able to make it to the coast. This island exists in no database. It is an island hidden from the world. Why is it being hidden? Why isn't it on any maps? I'm certain this is all intentional. Was that attack on my vessel part of some attempt at complete concealment? There are more mysteries than I can count, but I am resolved to discover all of this island's secrets." That's right, a mysterious, unrelenting fog seems to obscure Palpagos from the outside, and if you take a look in-game, you can actually see this fog for yourself on the outskirts of the map. Some of you may have just thought that this was a gameplay concession to conceal the horizon line from view, but it actually has its own lore, so there's that. Keep the fog in the back of your mind as we continue, because we're definitely going to be revisiting it later in the video. Over the course of the following weeks, the Castaway would become acquainted with the native Pals, and even encounter members of the Rayne Syndicate, a major faction on the islands with an exceptionally large presence in the southeast. In fact, the Rayne Syndicate is just one of many factions that inhabit these islands, each with their own agendas and territories, and we'll talk more about some of them later on too. All the while, though, the Castaway also makes note of odd ruins they encounter dotted throughout the land, ruins that they attribute to an ancient civilization that once stood in Palpagos's distant past. Anyone who's played Palworld for even a short amount of time will undoubtedly be aware of the ancient civilization's works, even if they've never heard of them by name. And the reason why is because many of their constructions are fundamental to the way that we understand this game. When first washing up on shore, your character will collect a small tablet-like device that contains the map and Palpedia, which itself is a product of the ancients, as are the various stone ruins, altars, underground citadels, and the like encountered all across the archipelago. But there are two creations in particular that really stick out, and each of which receives an entire dedicated journal entry by the Castaway. The first are the giant spire-like towers that dot the landscape, which today serve as the locations where boss battles can be undertaken with each of Palworld's Palworld's respective faction leaders, but in universe, there's very little information as to why or even how these towers may have been constructed. We know not only from the Castaway's musings, but also from the writings of other characters such as the Rayne Syndicate's Zoe Rayne, and most recently Saya Kurosaki, who leads the Moonflowers, that the towers have a deep-seated significance with the history of the islands, but what exactly that significance is remains wholly unclear. All we know is that the faction leaders and their ancestors have been guarding them since ancient times. The other major construction that the Castaway attributes to the ancients, though, is much more thoroughly understood, and those are any of a whole variety of statues depicting pals. Throughout these depictions, we know that besides Anubis, the pals Palladius and Necromus, Frostallion, and Jetdragon all held some level of significance to this society, and many of you will probably recognize that these latter four pals are commonly referred to as legendaries, given that each of them boasts a unique legendary skill, which no other types of pals can spawn with naturally aside from these four species. Now, the legendary pals are very much an enigma in their own right, but thanks to their Palpedia entries, we actually know a decent bit about the mythology surrounding them. Palladius and Necromus, for example, at least according to legend, were once a single being, but for whatever reason, the two split apart at some point in the past, with the pair now serving as a living metaphor for the ever-present battle between darkness and light. A sort of walking yin and yang, if you will. Then there's Frostallion and Jetdragon, who themselves are also equal and opposite in a manner of speaking. Frostallion is said to be the guardian deity of the Palpagos Islands, and, quote, "In the past, when a calamity struck the land, it soared into the sky and sealed away the threat by casting the island into eternal winter." This pal also has a subspecies called Frostallion Noct, who's also said to have subdued a calamity in the past by plunging the island into eternal night. But in Palworld's base version, there was no way to acquire this pal outside of breeding it into existence, so it's naturally a little bit more overlooked when compared to its contemporary. But then there's Jetdragon, which I think has one of the most thought-provoking Palpedia entries in the entire game, because it has long stood as a prophecy. Watches over Palpagos Island from high above. When calamity returns to the land, the earth will split open, and the skies will burn. It is destined to strike down the calamity in a flash of total destruction. So with all of this in mind, the reason I wanted to start this video out with this review is because within the underlying information, we can already identify a ton of enduring mysteries. First, we have the matter of the fog surrounding Palpagos. Where did it come from? Who, if anyone, is responsible for it, and why? Perhaps an obvious guess would be the ancient civilization, but we don't know much about them either. Where did they originate from? And if their society really did benefit from a mutual standing with Palkind, as is insinuated by Lily Everhart, then what ended up happening to them? And lastly, we have the matter of the legendary pals. What caused the split between Palladius and Necromus? How does Frostallion Noct play into what we know of Palpagos' past? And perhaps the most important and driving question of all, what is the calamity spoken of in legend? How did it manifest? And could its inevitable showdown with Jetdragon allude to future or present Palworld content? There's certainly a lot of information to assimilate here, and even more that's left to the imagination. But this is precisely what makes the Feybreak update so exciting, because I can confidently say that by the end of this video, we're going to have some answer for every single mystery that we've just listed. So, armed with that information, let's make our way to the Isle of Feybreak. When stepping onto Feybreak for the first time, it'll quickly become apparent that this island is very much unlike those found anywhere else in the nearby archipelago. From the reddish foliage and the new, never-before-seen mineral deposits of hexalite quartz to the beautiful gold hues of the Loess Plains, there's a number of grand and unique landscapes to behold. But past the rolling dunes of the shore, there lies another biome of even more bizarre composition. To the southwest sits a valley of bluish-purple grass, large violet fungus, and a harrowing set of ruins. The Oculus Gate is a massive circular stone structure that sits between the rest of Feybreak Island and the associated tower to the far south. A clear remnant of the ancient civilization, it's easily the largest structure attributed to them that we've yet seen, and for most players, their first time laying eyes upon it will have been after traversing the hidden passage connecting it to the golden pastures nearby. This tunnel terminates in a large altar, consistent with those on other isles, altars that seal away powerful pals. And this particular altar should get players' attention right away, because inside is none other than Frostallion Noct, the legendary subspecies of the pal that we just talked about. Most players probably won't be able to get in here just yet because of the requirements needed to face this thing, but nearby you can still find a memo, the first of 5 in fact, belonging to a new character by the name of Bjorn Seligsson. At the time of recording, Bjorn, along with his partner pal Bastigor, is the latest of Palworld's tower bosses, and by extension, he's also the leader of the faction introduced in this update, known as the Feybreak Warriors. Just like every other tower boss in the game, Bjorn has some number of journal entries which help us learn more about him and his faction's goals. But although it would almost certainly be unbeknownst to any players who stumbled across this thing for the first time, Bjorn's entries retain a quality that definitely sets them apart from the writings of other faction bosses, for he is one of only a small handful of characters that discusses their ancestry. What we'll quickly learn is that the ancient history of his kin is everything to Bjorn, and this is made plainly apparent to us even within his very first chronological piece of writing. For that day, which may or not come, I have pursued strength relentlessly. Have I ever doubted this path even once? Nay, and it seems I shall not end as a fool. The Nuisance will surely find its way. Long ago, the wise ones, with the light of their wisdom, raised the towers on these islands as the foundation of a fleeting peace. Now, even as it stirs chaos, the Nuisance will see them clearly. How ironic. Is it all bad? Nay. Thanks to this ever-present reminder, I shall not forget my duty. For the many nameless souls of the past, I shall slay this one nameless outsider. The burden shall be fulfilled. In spite of his archaic way of speaking, most who have an interest in Palworld lore will likely be quick to realize the gravity of what has just been laid before us. This journal reads very differently to virtually any other in the game, and even though it's only a handful of sentences long, we can almost immediately get a feel for just who Bjorn is going to be as a character. And perhaps more importantly, why. As mentioned before, Bjorn Seligsson is not the only character to have direct ties with the ancient civilization. Prior to this, we know that Lily Everhart's Free Pal Alliance was descended from and formed around a specific set of ideals passed down from the ancients, that being mutual respect and dignity between people and pals. But Bjorn's lineage stems from this period as well, and much like the Free Pal Alliance, his faction, the Feybreak Warriors, have derived their purpose straight from the creed of the ancients. The entire mission of the Feybreak Warriors centers around the elimination of some unknown force, only referred to as the Nuisance. With only this first entry under our belt, we know very little about what the Nuisance actually is, or how it relates to the greater Palpagos Islands, other than the fact that, as Bjorn says, it was for the purpose of subduing this strange adversary that the ancients, which he calls the Wise Ones, constructed the towers in the first place. That's definitely the most that's ever been revealed regarding their purpose, but let's continue onward with Bjorn's second entry, because, trust me, this is only the very tip of the proverbial iceberg. The second of Seligsson's journals can be found at another important site on the Feybreak Island, at the foot of the crystallized ancient tree, whose vast golden boughs loom over the valley at the island's center and provide refuge to a number of mystical pals. It seems then that such a site may have once stood as a point of reflection and contemplation for Bjorn, which, if true, may have first inspired him to provide a written record of the island's deepest folklore. This place is cursed. Nay, it is I and Bastigor who are cursed. Thousands of years ago, when a colossal fortress still stood in this land, reaching toward the heavens, it appeared suddenly. The heavens shattered, and we fell disgracefully. Our kin, who once looked down upon others from the sky, fled in panic, tails between their legs. But I, nay, my ancestors alone, did not abandon this land, reduced to ashes, nor its people. Fallen from the sky, we gathered the bewildered folk and bared our fangs against it. From that moment we forged an unchanging resolve, becoming the people of the Feybreak, and so my kin, who once merely sullied the lowest ranks, took a new throne and vowed to bear all burdens. It might surprise some to learn that this testimony is actually the most comprehensive write-up that we have for the origin of any given clan in the entire Palworld universe, and yes, perhaps more pressingly, what we have here also serves as an indirect account of the very events that brought the ancient civilization to its end. After nearly a year of this mystery plaguing the minds of lore enthusiasts and fans, here it is, just laid right out for us. It's almost surreal to see, but this will hardly be the last time that Bjorn almost matter-of-factly drops a monumental piece of lore right in our laps like this. Either way, what we've just learned is that the Wise Ones, or the Ancients, met their end as a direct result of the Nuisance. In times predating modern records, Bjorn describes a massive fortress that stood in this land, insinuated to be the very pinnacle of ancient architecture. The way the fortress is described makes it clear that it wasn't merely a large building, it was a symbol of everything that this society had built, a structure that housed the most wealthy and influential figures at its peak, and which seems to have been one of the first targets of the Ancients' unnamed adversary. Where such a grandiose structure may have stood is entirely unknown. Perhaps the Oculus Gate and the other strange ring-like stone structures that dot the Feybreak Island could have something to do with it, but there's no way to be sure. Either way though, when the structure fell, taking the elites of ancient society along with it, it was the lower castes that would take up arms to defend the island in their stead. This is how the Feybreak warriors came into being, and they weren't holding any punches. Like the previous entry, Bjorn's third journal is also located beneath a tree, this time a ways to the east. And in it, he details this initial battle between the denizens of Palpagos and the Nuisance, shortly after the collapse. However, that description alone doesn't quite do this thing justice. I believe that what we're about to read may just be the single most important piece of written lore in the entirety of Palworld. It's a lore drop on a scale unlike anything we've ever seen before, and it's something that I believe even relatively casual players will have no trouble understanding for the monumental piece that it is. Because what Bjorn leaves us with next is the origin story of the legendary Pals, and in many ways, the birth of the modern era of the Palpagos Islands themselves. The battle against it did not end, even with the aid of a thunder dragon, a pair of celestial beings, and the wisdom of a noble paladin. We could not bring about its destruction. The celestial beings, determined not to let it escape, shrouded the island in an unending winter night. The Black Pegasus melted into the night and vanished. This land became still, unseen, and leaving the island became impossible. The paladin, ashamed of his failure, split himself in two, vowing to never show mercy again. The dragon vanished beyond the reach of the flash, disappearing from sight. In hindsight, perhaps it has now returned, because it has sensed the coming of that day. And now, here we are. It still slumbers. Do I guard this land truly for the sake of duty? Nay. No matter the pretense, I cannot hide it. Perhaps I simply wish to meet a worthy foe. All at once, it seems like nearly every great mystery in this game makes total sense. As it turns out, Bjorn's Nuisance is not a new phenomenon to us. It's actually the very same antagonistic presence that we've known to exist since the very beginning of Palworld. The Nuisance and the Calamity referenced in the Palpedia entries of Frostallion and Jetdragon are one and the same, and as we now know, the initial confrontation with this thing didn't seem to go very well at all. When the legendary Pals suffered defeat, it affected each of them in different ways. For the entity known only as the Paladin, the shame of defeat was so severe that its noble spirit would be split in two, creating the Pals we know today as Palladius and Necromus, lining up perfectly with the events first hinted at in their Palpedia entry. We also know that the calamities referenced in the entries of both Frostallion and its subspecies Frostallion Noct were not two separate events, as I, and I imagine many other people, had previously assumed. Instead, the unending winter and the unending night referenced in both respective entries are simply two different ways of describing the unending fog that we know surrounds the archipelago. It was the work of both of these pals that brought the fog into existence, and it's pretty directly indicated that because the Nuisance could not be defeated, the best these legendaries could do was to keep their adversary from being able to escape and potentially spread destruction elsewhere. This is why the fog truly exists, not to keep outsiders out, but to keep them in. So it is that people such as the Castaway and even our player characters who have ended up in the island in the modern day have similarly been unable to leave. Then, finally, there's the matter of Jet Dragon, or the Thunder Dragon, as Bjorn describes it, which certainly has the strangest reaction to this failed conflict. At the time, it may have seemed like Jet Dragon abandoned its fellow legendaries, and the people they sought to protect, altogether. But obviously, with hindsight, we know that all Jet Dragon was doing is living up to what was prophesied of it, which does in fact seem to insinuate that since this pal has been sighted again in the modern day, it likely means that another rematch with the Nuisance is somewhat imminent. It's kind of refreshing to finally have some deeper understanding of the backstory behind the legendary pals. Ever since Palworld's release, they've been such intriguing yet enigmatic figures, and now that we have more context on their relationship to the ancient civilization and this unnamed nuisance, it seems that there's a pretty clear direction for where Palworld's overall story may be going. But I want to put that discussion on hold for just a bit longer, because Bjorn still has 2 more writings for us to discuss, and although neither of them really focuses on the main underlying narrative that we're beginning to put together here, they do still offer a lot of valuable supplementary information that I think is just as worthwhile in its own right. Bjorn's 4th work can be found on the northeastern side of the Feybreak Island, close in proximity to the coast, which overlooks the towering Mount Obsidian and the many lands that lie beyond. Once again, the area where the entry can be found almost seems to hint at its content, for in this penultimate entry, we find Bjorn reminiscing on his interactions with another character that we've heard about before, the father of the Rayne Syndicate's leader, Zoe, and what Bjorn tells us about him is very interesting. I wonder if the lone daughter of Rayne's blood is well. I did her a disservice. In any case, the last time I saw her, she was still at her mother's breast. She will not remember me. Her father and I never saw eye to eye. He was not a man driven by duty or the past. On the day we parted ways, I gave him a final test, a foolish pretense. In the end, it was nothing more than a childish spite. Surprisingly, he accepted without hesitation. He turned out to be a man of principle, more than I had expected. It was a task even a child could manage, but he never returned. Since then, the young ones who had gathered around him were left without leadership, but it seems his daughter has taken the helm and brought some semblance of order. Though our paths diverged, she has faithfully upheld the mission to guard the tower. Indeed, she is truly your child. There's something unmistakably ominous about the way that Bjorn frames this altercation between himself and Zoe's father. And altercation, I believe, is indeed the only accurate way to describe it. It's not clear what transpired between the 2 men, but whatever it was, it seems that it likely resulted in Rayne's inevitable and untimely disappearance, one which Zoe herself seems unable to explain. However, I think what we can insinuate rather easily is the point of contention that may have driven these men apart. There are a multitude of differences between the Feybreak warriors and the Rayne Syndicate, but foremost among them is the idea that while the former group has long abided strictly by the directions of their ancestors, the latter group has changed so much from its origin as to effectively be a different organization entirely. While, just like the other factions, the Rayne Syndicate does indeed remember the duty that the ancients bestowed upon them to uphold the sanctity of the towers, they're still a group that could be described as distracted. Many other organizations throughout the Palpagos Islands have taken on additional activities and objectives in order to bring additional meaning to their groups, and the Rayne Syndicate is no different. The Pal Genetic Research Unit in the Astral Mountains busy themselves with experimentation in order to further understand Pal kind. The Moonflowers on Sakurajima Island seem to have formed a cult around the phases of the moon, and the Rayne Syndicate has gotten themselves involved in the criminal underbelly of the island, poaching pals under the nose of the PIDF, and apparently trading them with other underground figures like the Black Marketeer. More recently, they've also established oil drilling operations off the coast of the island, in at least 3 separate locations, and in all of their actions, one thing remains consistent. The Rayne Syndicate is an exploitative group that takes advantage of the natural wonders of the Palpagos Islands for their own gain, which I don't think I have to tell you is very much the contrary of the ideals of Bjorn and his group. Perhaps it was this divergence of character that initially led to the 2 men's dispute, leaving Zoe without her father and Bjorn stuck with his woeful guilt. This brings us to the final of Seligsson's writings, and in a similar nature to the former, this 5th entry is considerably more self-reflective. It reads as follows. If Just if everything were to end and I were freed from all burdens, what would I do? A man with little time left, what would I do? Surely I would continue to fight until I crumble to dust. The world must be vast. Surely there are warriors beyond my imagination, countless in number. If so, perhaps I should repair that old ship. It has been too long since I last sailed the seas, and Bastigor, it is about time for you as well. After dealing with the Nuisance, perhaps I will seek a mate for you. And with that, the writings of Bjorn Seligsson come to an end. In just 5 short entries, we've learned quite a lot about the history and present state of the Palpagos Islands. We know how the fog surrounding them was created, we learned a considerable amount about the ancient civilization and its collapse, and we gained a much better understanding of the mythos surrounding the legendary pals. But there's still one massive question that remains unanswered. What is the Nuisance? If not a man-made force created by one of the island's factions, if not one of the legendary pals, what could possess a power so monumental as to bring about the fall of the ancient civilization, a society whose technology far outpaces our own, and who we know was aided freely by the likes of lesser pals and deities alike? What on earth could have been responsible for this? And after some research, I think we can pretty reasonably point to a candidate that seems to have been responsible for everything. The Nuisance's identity was hinted at in the Feybreak release trailer, but it's only given the full context of everything we've discussed so far that things really begin to fall into place. The truth seems to be that nothing on Earth could have been responsible for this catastrophe, but that still leaves us with the rest of the cosmos to contest with, and it's here where I'd like to introduce you to a set of pals that I've lovingly dubbed the Xeno series. Aside from being the name of one of my favorite gaming media franchises of all time, the Xeno series is a small collection of pals that have appeared within Palworld over the course of the last 2 major content updates. This line contains a total of 3 distinct species, the first 2 of which were introduced in Sakurajima, where they would begin appearing on Palpagos in a very peculiar way. Meteor strikes are rare events that take place at random intervals across the islands, during which, as the name suggests, a meteor will crash to the ground, and if the crash site is investigated, players will be greeted with one of several different results. There's a small handful of different pals that can be encountered and subsequently captured exclusively within the vicinity of a meteor strike, one of which is Selene, the partner pal of Saya, as well as 2 other species, the small and purple-colored Xenovader and the large, silverish Xenogard. Obviously, the strange appearances of these pals, combined with the fact that they're exclusively found within the vicinity of a crashed space rock, rather heavily implies that these species are of extraterrestrial origin. Aside from this neat bit of world building though, there's not much of note about these pals in and of themselves, or at least nothing that would implicate them in the downfall of the ancient civilization. But when the Feybreak update went live, there was a 3rd and final pal added to the Xeno line that would change everything. I'm of course talking about the one and only Xenolord. Xenolord is easily the most fearsome encounter in the entirety of Palworld. It's one of only a small handful of pals that has the grim honor of appearing exclusively as a raid boss, meaning it's poised to be a challenge not just for one team of pals, but your entire pal collection. As the only raid boss at the time of recording to appear at max level 60, this easily makes Xenolord the single most challenging foe in the entire game. But if you're lucky enough to take it down and collect its egg to add it to your collection, then there's a couple of interesting things that you'll probably notice pretty quickly about this pal in question. Things that seem to indicate that it's likely Xenolord that the ancients so devoutly feared. First of all, take a look at its body. Notice anything about those wings? That's right, they're the very same style as jet dragons, only toned blue instead of reddish pink. But it's this creature's Palpedia entry that really gives it away. The other members of the Xeno family, Xenovader and Xenogard, both have Palpedia entries that discuss their odd and miraculous ability to draw energy from sending and receiving information, almost making it seem like these pals are potentially of inorganic origin. But Xenolord's entry takes things a step further, because here we get indisputable confirmation of its objectives in the form of the creature's code. Destination reached. Priority: locate entity Supersonic Dragon. Note: conquest deadline exceeded by error code 126 DC years. Update: no conquest traces found. Naturalization confirmed. Commence elimination protocol. Staff memo: refrain from forgetting or consuming critical data. So, with everything we've discussed today in mind, I think it's fair to say that the ancient history of Palworld is looking a lot less unknowable, but perhaps a lot more strange than it was at the outset of this video. In days gone by, Pals and humans would have lived together on these islands in peace. Their efforts resulted in an age of prosperity that was defined by societal and technological advancement, perhaps even outpacing what we have today. And with the formidable legendary Pals looking over the land, all was well. At least, until Xenolord and its fellows arrived from the stars. They brought a swift end to this peaceful society, and when the combined might of even the legendaries proved fruitless in defeating the threat, they instead opted to seal it away, cutting off its communication with whoever or whatever had created it, and establishing the veil of fog that in the modern day protects the Palpagos archipelago from the outside world. From here, many of the factions created shortly after the disaster would take it upon themselves to protect the ancient towers, which were left as a means of somehow defending against the likes of Xenolord or some other veritable catastrophe. Over the generations, though, many of these groups would forget what it was they were even defending in the first place, until only the Feybreak warriors remained with their ancestral ideals intact, which brings us to where we are today, learning of that history again from the likes of Bjorn. It seems that multiple Xenolords have resurfaced after untold centuries of absence, and today, the final battle between it and the legendary Pals is yours, the players, to instigate. Who would have thought that so much of Palworld's history would culminate in just this one raid encounter? Though Xenolord certainly isn't the only raid boss to have a significant amount of world building behind its appearance, though I suppose that's a discussion best left for another video. So what's next for Palworld after this? With so many mysteries solved, where do we even go from here? And I think that if Feybreak is any indication, we can expect that future updates are going to retain a similar level of focus on storytelling, or at least I hope they do. Because even though we have indeed put a rest to a great number of enduring mysteries today, there's still a lot of other questions, both new and old, that could definitely do with some illumination. One of the most intriguing new mysteries, at least to me, is the identity of the staff mentioned in Xenolord's Palpedia entry. And then there's also the matter of its multitudinous similarities to Jetragon. If Xenolord is a creation of the staff, does that mean that Jetragon is as well? In retrospect, its body plan is pretty robotic, so could it be that this legendary was created by some of the same hands that brought Xenolord into existence? It's certainly an interesting thought. There are also still older mysteries that could be tackled in future updates as well, such as the origin and significance of the massive tree off of Palpagos' northern coast. This is another aspect of the islands that was first cataloged by the Castaway, and it makes you wonder if the story of this thing might tie in with other significant trees we've seen more recently, such as the crystallized ancient tree found on Feybreak. It's definitely something that would be intriguing to find out more about. Either way, what I do feel confident in saying for sure though, is that Palworld definitely doesn't seem to show any signs of slowing down anytime soon, unless some kind of extraneous factors deter Pocket Pair from releasing more updates, which, even in the worst case scenario, seems pretty unlikely. I think there'll definitely be at least a year's worth of additional updates to this game, maybe even more, which honestly is super exciting. It's really not every day that a game like this places more emphasis on story rather than less as time goes on, and I think it's absolutely something worth celebrating when we see it in instances like this. But with that, you've reached the end of yet another video. I hope you guys had some fun with this one. It was very cool to be able to take a look at Palworld again so long after my initial series of videos on it. As I was writing the script and sitting down to record this one, I really found myself sort of overcome with future Palworld video ideas. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure to let me know. I would love to have an excuse to make more stuff about this game if there's interest. I also want to give one more big thanks to Rayne for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to head over to buyraycon.com/Averberon to get some great deals site-wide. And of course, big thanks to all of you for continuing to support this channel. With that though, this is Averberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.